Newton, Griffith, Jones, and Stroke Dynamics, Me versus TSI in Transition, Stroke, and Recovery Part 2, number 1668, the 3rd of June 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, Category Stroke. The bottom chart and recovery pattern, it took about 3 months after my stroke, until around September 21, 2025, before they converged again. This is important because it suggests that recovery was not instantaneous. The stroke was an event. But recovery was a process in complex systems engineering. This is known as bifurcation or an instability phase. This also provides empirical visualization of biomedical healing. This observation fits my personal experience. After the stroke, my lifestyle changed significantly. I had more sleep, fewer walking steps, less stress from either interpersonal or business-related sources, more blood pressure monitoring data, and a more regular daily routine. The TSI-stroke model recognized these simultaneous improvements more sharply because it is sensitive to interactions among multiple factors. The Me-stroke model also recognized improvement, but more slowly and less dramatically. Therefore, the gap between the curves may reflect the difference between chronic stress before the stroke and deliberate recovery after the stroke. Notably, only during the approximate period from June 21, 2025 through September 21, 2025 were the TSI-stroke values consistently and noticeably higher than the Me-stroke values. This means the chart is not only a risk-event chart. It is also a stroke recovery trajectory chart. The stroke date is a one-time snapshot, but the divergence and reconvergence of these two curves tell the story as a movie. The engineering analogy. To explain this finding clearly, the engineering analogy may be stronger than the medical analogy. Imagine a metal plate with a small hidden crack. Engineers monitor the structure using two different models. The first model is a conventional load model. It adds the effects of different forces. This is similar to the traditional elasticity-based Me-stroke model. The second model is a fracture-sensitive model. It accounts for interactions among stress, material condition, crack behavior, and internal vulnerability. This combined Griffith-Jones perspective is similar to the TSI-stroke model. For a long time, both models may produce nearly identical results. The structure is still operating safely. Crack may exist, but it is not growing significantly. The material remains within its stable region. During this period, ordinary load analysis and fracture-sensitive analysis may tell almost the same story. Then the structure begins to approach failure. The total external load may not change dramatically. However, the internal condition changes. The hidden crack begins to grow. Local stress concentration increases. The material behavior becomes nonlinear. The structure is no longer behaving like a simple elastic object. At this point, these two engineering models begin to separate. The conventional load model continues to track the general load, similar to my Me-stroke model. The fracture-sensitive model becomes more responsive because it detects the internal interactions that lead toward failure, similar to my TSI-stroke model. Then the fracture occurs. After the fracture, engineers may reduce the load, reinforce the damaged region, repair the structure, or stabilize the operating condition. Over time, crack propagation slows or stops. The material enters a new equilibrium state, as stability returns. The two models begin to agree again. This is exactly the visual story shown by the Me-stroke and TSI-stroke curves in biomedical applications. The curves are not merely showing high risk versus low risk. They are showing a structural life cycle, elastic state, crack propagation state, fracture event. Post-fracture stabilization state. This analogy makes the meaning of the chart easier to understand without heavy mathematics. Plastic deformation and fracture mechanics. From a physics viewpoint, the process may also be described through plastic deformation and fracture mechanics. In the early stable state, the material behaves in an orderly manner. The structure can absorb repeated stress without visible failure. This resembles the pre-stroke elastic plastic period, when Me-stroke and TSI-stroke remain close together. As stress continues over time, the material may begin to deform. This deformation may not immediately cause fracture, but it changes the internal structure. Energy is being absorbed. Damage is accumulating. The material may still look intact from the outside, but its internal state is changing. This resembles the transition period before the stroke. The overall burden may not appear dramatically different, but the interaction among stressors begins to change the internal state of the system. Finally, when accumulated deformation and local stress concentration exceed the structure's tolerance, fracture occurs. This is analogous to my stroke event near the pontine region of my brain. After the fracture, the system does not immediately return to normal. It must enter a recovery or stabilization phase. The damaged region must be protected, stress must be reduced, the system must find a new equilibrium. In the chart, this is shown by the gradual reconvergence of me stroke and TSI stroke approximately 3 months after my stroke on June 21, 2025. Therefore, the chart shows not only the end-stage event, but also the approach to failure and the return toward stability, which behaves more like a fluid dynamics process than an end-stage solid mechanics event. The physics lineage. This study also completes an intellectual lineage that has influenced my thinking for decades. Newton gave us force, motion, and interaction laws. His work showed that nature can be understood through equations that connect a few variables in a deterministic structure. Griffith introduced fracture mechanics. His great insight was that failure is not determined only by external stress. Internal defects matter. A structure can fail even when the external load appears acceptable because cracks amplify the local stress field. Professor Norman Jones extended this thinking into dynamic plasticity. His work showed that failure is not merely an instantaneous event. Materials absorb energy, deform, accumulate damage, and evolve through time before ultimate collapse or fracture. My current work adds the longitudinal system trajectory. It does not only describe the final fracture event, it shows the transition toward failure and the recovery toward stability afterward. My viscoplastic medicine theory (VMT) draws upon both fluid mechanics and solid mechanics perspectives to describe TSI's dynamic process. Griffith focused mainly on fracture initiation near the final stage. Jones emphasized plastic deformation and energy absorption before failure. My TSI versus me comparison shows the entire movement through time in a biomedical system. Stable state, transition state, failure event, recovery and restabilization. This is why the present paper feels unusually complete to me. It connects the biomedical observation back to the engineering and physics lineage that shaped my own scientific thinking. The lineage can be summarized as Newton interaction laws, Griffith fracture initiation, Jones dynamic plastic deformation and energy absorption, Shu longitudinal transition and recovery dynamics in biomedical applications. This is not merely a medical stroke risk study. It is a study of how a complex system moves from stability to instability and then back towards stability again. Why this paper feels strong to me. The strength of this paper comes from its simplicity and visibility. A reader does not need to understand advanced mathematics to see the message. In the 1-year chart, the two curves are close before the stroke. They separate around the stroke and then gradually come together again during recovery over the following 3 months. It is similar to watching two boats traveling side by side in a river. As the current becomes turbulent, the boats drift apart. As the river becomes calmer, they gradually move closer together again. That visual story is powerful because it matches the actual clinical timeline. The additive me model and the multiplicativity model remain nearly identical during stable periods, diverged markedly during the stroke period, and converged again during recovery. This one sentence may summarize the whole study. The chart shows that the separation itself may be more important than the absolute value of either model. The divergence may represent the system entering an unstable transition state. The reconvergence may represent recovery and restabilization. This idea also bridges medicine, physics, engineering, and personal longitudinal data. It shows that the body can be viewed as a dynamic system, not merely as a collection of isolated biomarkers. It also shows why multiplication may be more powerful than addition when studying acute triggering events. The me stroke model is useful because it shows the general metabolic and vascular burden. The TSI-stroke model is useful because it captures interaction-amplified vulnerability. The difference between them becomes most meaningful when the system approaches instability. Therefore, this study does not simply conclude that TSI predicts stroke better than me. It goes further. It shows that the temporary divergence between these two models may reveal a hidden transition phase before and after a major vascular event. Conclusion: this study began with a simple question that appeared during an ordinary day. What if I compare direct multiplication against weighted addition? The answer became much richer than expected, using the same 3 inputs of EEG, pulse pressure, and systolic blood pressure. The me stroke model and TSI stroke model produced highly similar curves during stable periods. However, around the actual stroke event of June 21, 2025, the two curves separated clearly. After 3 months of recovery, they gradually converged again. This pattern suggests a complete system trajectory: stable state before stroke, transition state. Around stroke, failure event on June 21, 2025, recovery and restabilization afterward. The engineering analogy makes this pattern easier to understand. Me-stroke resembles a conventional load model. TSI-stroke resembles a fracture-sensitive model that detects interaction among stressors, internal vulnerability, and system instability. When the structure is stable, both models agree. Near failure, they diverge. After stabilization, they converge again. This is why the present research paper feels strong. It completes a conceptual bridge from Newton's interaction laws to Griffith's fracture mechanics to Norman Jones's dynamic plasticity, and finally to my longitudinal VPM plus TSI analysis of biomedical system transition and recovery. The most important message is not only that TSI-stroke predicted the stroke more accurately. The deeper message is that the divergence and reconvergence between me-stroke and TSI-stroke may reveal the hidden movement of a complex system through stability, instability, failure, and recovery. This is the movie, not a snapshot. It is also the reason this study may represent a meaningful completion of the physics lineage behind my medical research work over the past 17 years. From a preventive medicine perspective, the conclusion that the divergence between the two curves may be more important than their absolute values is a useful takeaway. If applied to daily health tracking, a sudden separation between me-stroke and TSI-stroke could serve as a dashboard warning signal. The finding that the temporary divergence of these two curves signals an impending failure state, while their tight reconvergence signs true physiological stabilization, is entirely my own discovery. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to Th. Author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.